ever spent hours adding chips and weathering to your models only to step back and realize it just looks wrong and it ends up ruining your carefully painted model? After painting thousands of different weathering effects, I realized this can all be fixed by a few simple tricks. So today I'm gonna show you the mistakes that make your chipping look wrong, which technique to avoid so your models don't end up looking like a freaking disaster, and I'll show you my secret hybrid technique that will make your chipping looking good every single time. Before I tell you what's ruining your chipping effects, let me tell you why learning this technique is so important. A thing that no one really mentions about chipping is that it doesn't just plummet your model in the grimdark, dystopic world we know and love, making your mini feel more authentic and real, but it also helps you improve the look of the miniature itself. You can paint a very simple base color, and just by adding chips, you will achieve both detail and contrast, visual contrast. But you gotta be careful not to fall in this major first mistake. Adding chips can be a lot of fun, but be careful, because it can go from cool, weathered, dystopic look to 101 Dalmatians territory real fast. Try to think where the armor gets more banged up and focus your chipping in those areas. Again, we want contrast, so having some areas untouched and some areas with chipping, it's good. So now you know where to apply your chips. Still, there's another thing you need to be real careful about. Can you tell me what's wrong with this? It looks off, doesn't it? This second mistake is often the result of using a very popular method for chipping, the sponge. If you press too hard, this can happen and it'll throw off both the balance and the scale. Chips always need to be on scale. So having these huge chunks like you saw always looks off and is a bit ugly, to be honest. Problem is, like I said, this mistake is caused by a popular and trendy technique to paint easy texture and chips. It seems really cool and easy to use, or at least that's what they want you to think. Dun, 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 dun. You have two main methods to add chips with acrylics. Before I tell you that though, I have something really exciting coming up. If you don't want to miss any information, just sign up to my newsletter in the link down below. You will not just get updates, but also painting recipes, hacks, tips on a weekly basis. So sign up using the link in the description. Other mediums, you have the chipping effect or the hairspray method. I'm just gonna focus on acrylics. You can paint chips by hand using a detail brush, which is a good way to practice brush control and proper dilution, painting lines and dots and stuff like that. But it's also kind of hard because you have no guidance on where to place them, except maybe looking at reference. But we don't want to do that, right? So you think a sponge with its irregular surface can be a good solution to give that randomness of chipping. It's gonna be like magic, right? Wrong. I honestly don't get the hype of the sponge. They're unpredictable, hard to control, and even hard to hold. 1 second you have no paint coming off of them, and in the next second they paint some very big and ugly chip. I mean, what the
Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration because you know I love being dramatic. Sponges can actually be pretty useful in the right hands, and they can give cool effects. My point was this: it's not as easy as it looks in tutorials. It's a big learning curve. I paint minis professionally, and I had an hard time controlling this little bugger. So, is there a better solution?
Don't stress it, I got you covered, bro. My chipping method is gonna solve all those issues, sort of. And I'm gonna break it down step by step for you.
So first off, let's pick a color for chipping. My to-go color for this job is Rhinox Hide because it works really well for any lighter color. For dark armors, I'll tell you later about it. But first, let me show you my secret weapon for this technique. We're gonna use something that you probably think you would never use again on an actual model. Something forgotten. Something that lost all hope to be used again. Finally, it's time for the old beat-up brush to shine. But wait, not any kind of old brush. It needs to be a certain way. Let me first show you how to load the brush properly for this technique. I'm pretty much loading this brush like I would a dry brush, using a wet sponge to moisten it first. Now that's irony. Then you dip it in the paint. We don't want to dip just the tip, but also the sides as well. Then you can use the sponge to get rid of the excess, then test it out on your hand or on paper if you're that kind of person. On the sponge that I'm using, I always have a wet section where I can moisten the brush so I don't create chalkiness, and some dry areas where I just wick off the excess. I'm gonna gently start applying the paint very delicately to the surface, focusing mostly on the edges. The split bristles are gonna create that random pattern that we're looking for, and the consistency will be much more controllable than with a sponge. Also, more comfortable to hold, especially if you have to paint smaller parts like a Space Marine armor. Why use a completely different tool when you can use the same tool as always, just old? Okay, but how do you choose your brushes? It only needs to have two main features. The bristles need to be kind of split apart, and it needs to be big enough to be easy to use on bigger surfaces, but also small enough to use on smaller surfaces as well, so a medium size. Remember that mistakes that I talked about before apply here as well. Well, really just the first, to be honest. So don't overdo it, especially in the middle areas away from the edges. If you feel like you go overboard with that, you can correct it very easily when it's still wet, lightly tapping the surface with your finger and then repainting it. If you take most of it out, it's not going to be a problem. And then once you've done that, we move on to step 3. Time for the hybrid part of this technique. I call this hybrid theory because I strongly believe that combining techniques in miniature painting is the best way to find new ways to paint faster, more efficiently, and honestly just having more fun. And I also call it that because I like Linkin Park, I guess. Here we're combining stippling with an old brush with detailed brush work, creating a randomness that is then cleaned up by some edge highlighting. But you don't need to edge highlight everywhere, just in some restricted areas, pretty much following where you place the chips. For darker colors, especially black, use lighter colors to paint the chips and the cuts, and to edge highlight. You could use lighter colors for chipping even lighter armor, but honestly, darker chips on lighter armor bring more contrast, and they allow you to skip that shading of every single chip. You can still add edge highlights just in the lower part of the chips where the light hits, but honestly, that's totally optional. And really, first you need to master regular edge highlighting. So it's pretty simple. It's a big compromise between being fast and get good results, but of course, you'll need to use a little bit of edge highlighting.
So this is my hybrid method. I think it's a good compromise between fast and effective, using detail brush and old brush, which helps you find that randomness. But clearly it does imply you do use a little bit of edge highlighting. But what if you hate that? Well, don't worry, because I have a video here for you that's gonna make the edge highlighting process a little bit less of a nightmare. Quite a bit less. Almost none. I'll see you there. Well, you see past me there, but you know how